Welcome back to African Colonization TV and Biafran History. So in today's video, we are going to tell you a brief history concerning Imperial Bokassa I at Central Africa during his era, what happened and the things he did during his regime. He rules Central Africa in a way that nobody believes it, and is a cannibalism, and is somebody that does not listen to anybody apart from his own order. So in this video, you are going to hear a lot of things concerning Bokassa's stories and his background, his history life, how he is schooled and where he is schooled. So don't skip any part of the video, try to watch it to the end, because this video really tells a lot concerning what happens in those years, 1977, in Central African Republic. So there are many things that you are going to learn in this video. So you are going to learn a lot of things concerning this Emperor Bokassa, because he really, in fact, is a very tough man, and he don't used to take any shits. He will do things he wants to do without looking back. So as you're about to watch, like, subscribe, and share the video to go around. Let everyone see what is happening and what happened during the days of Emperor Bokassa, and what really happened those days, because it's a history. So like, subscribe, and share it to go around, and thank you for watching.
On December 4, 1977, a very unusual event took place in the heart of Africa. This was the coronation of Emperor Bokassa I of the appropriately named Central African Empire, with a pomp and style patterned in much detail after that of Emperor Napoleon I in 1804. The man at the center of all of this was Jean Bédel Bokassa. Bokassa's career as a dictator of the Central African Republic combined not only extreme greed and personal violence, but delusions of grandeur unsurpassed by any other African leader. And he also gained a reputation for cannibalism. For a time, Jean Bédel Bokassa, who became known as the Butcher of Bangui, was a very embodiment of the extravagant African tyrant. Jean Bédel Bokassa was born on 22 February 1921 as one of 12 children of Mindogon Mufasa, a village chief, and his wife Mary Yoko in Bangui, a large Mbaka village in the Lobaya Basin located at the edge of the equatorial forest in the Central African Republic. From an early age, Bokassa's life was affected by violence. When he was 6 years old, his father was beaten to death at the local French prefect's office for protesting against forced labor. His distraught mother, Mary Yoko, committed suicide a week later, leaving a family of 12 children as orphans. A council of Bokassa's large family, in deliberating his future, decided it would be best if he were to receive a French education. He was therefore enrolled at the École Saint-Jean, where he was constantly taunted by other children about the fate of his unfortunate parents. Although he was short in stature, Jean Bédel Bokassa was physically strong and soon learned to stand up for himself. Later, Bokassa attended the École Saint-Louis, a school run by a well-known missionary who was responsible for endowing his students with an excellent command of French. The missionary hoped for a while that in the young Bokassa he had a priest in the making, but he soon realized that Bokassa had neither the aptitude for study nor the devotion required for that difficult calling, and so he advised the young lad to try the army instead. Jean Bédel Bokassa enlisted in the French army just a few months before the world was engulfed once again in the turmoil of the Second World War. Life in the forces was agreeable to Bokassa. Serving in the 2nd Battalion de Marche, he became a corporal in July of 1940 and a sergeant in November the following year. Once peace was restored in Europe, Jean Bédel Bokassa decided to stay in uniform since the army offered opportunities for training, travel, and advancement that were otherwise unavailable to his countrymen back in the Central African Republic. It was in this context that Bokassa, who had already proved himself on the battlefield, was chosen for special training. His ability to both read and write and speak the French language were other factors that worked in his favor. On 7 September 1950, Bokassa left for then Indochina as the transmissions expert with the colonial battalion of Saigon Cholon. In Saigon Cholon, Bokassa found himself on the losing side in one of the century's most bitter anti-colonial wars. In these wars, Bokassa saw action and received injuries, albeit only minor ones. In spite of the raging wars, Bokassa enjoyed his stay in Southeast Asia. One of the attractions for him was the women whom he found irresistible. While there in Southeast Asia, he met a 17-year-old named Nguyen Thi Hu and married her. Nguyen Thi Hu bore him a daughter, and 3 days after the birth, he registered the child, called Martine, as a French national. But when Bokassa sailed for Europe, the wife and child remained behind. He believed he would be returning to the East on another tour of duty, but that never happened. Jean Bédel Bokassa would later be reunited with Martine, but I'll touch on this a little bit later. In December 1958, Jean Bédel Bokassa was sent to Congo-Brazzaville as a military technical assistant, and a year later, he was stationed in Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic, then also known as Bangui Chari. This brought him back to his homeland after a 20-year absence. Black nationalism developed slowly in the colonial Central African Republic, and it was delayed by the exploitative nature of French rule, the scarcity of educational facilities, as well as the area's geographical isolation. Prior to independence, this country was known as Bangui Chari and was with Gabon, the French Congo, and Chad, one of the 4 units comprising French Equatorial Africa. Bangui Chari, now named the Central African Republic, was granted independence on 13 August 1960, and the country's first president was David Dacko. David Dacko was also a cousin of Jean Bédel Bokassa. After serving as a sergeant for 17 years, Jean Bédel Bokassa left the French army in 1961 with the rank of captain and was given the task of helping set up a national army. 3 years later, at the age of 42, Jean Bédel Bokassa was appointed Chief of Staff of the Central African Republic's 500-man army. Bokassa owed his sudden rise to prominence in the Central African Republic to his lengthy military career. The fact that he was related to David Dacko also helped. Moreover, Bokassa was convinced that he was a man of destiny and that greatness lay before him. Bokassa could be charming and humorous and had that indefinable quality of charisma that appealed to ordinary people. However, perhaps the critical flaw in Bokassa's character was his vanity. Elements of his pompous self-importance were already evident in the early days, though few would have guessed at the extremes of grandiose delusion that would eventually appear. Some clues, however, were not hard to find. Bokassa wanted recognition, especially on state occasions. He insisted on being next to or right behind President Dacko at public ceremonies. This often led to bitter arguments with the chief of protocol, Jean-Paul Duarte. In spite of these admonitions from Duarte, Bokassa was always angling to sit at the presidential table, to walk beside the president, or drive his car among the presidential motorcade. Initially, President David Dacko himself found Jean Bédel Bokassa's antics as being amusing. However, he certainly underestimated Bokassa, dismissing him as a drunkard and a womanizer despite others warning him about the potential danger his cousin posed. Early in 1965, David Dacko humiliated Bokassa at an official dinner in the presence of foreign diplomats. On this particular occasion, he said that, and I quote, "Colonel Bokassa only wants to collect medals and he's too stupid to pull off a coup d'etat." But very soon, the president came to realize that his army chief's ambition posed a serious threat to the regime. President Dacko could also see other African civilian regimes tumbling down to military coups, and so he hoped to avoid a similar fate by balancing the army with an armed police force of 500 men. To this end, he employed Jean Izamo, a man he trusted as a police chief. As an added precaution, David Dacko created a brigade of presidential security guards. During the middle of 1965, President Dacko sent Jean Bédel Bokassa to Paris, France as part of an annual delegation to the Bastille Day celebrations being held there. Then, as he prepared to leave for home, he was told that it would not be possible. President Dacko had forbidden Bokassa from returning to the Central African Republic. When he heard this, Bokassa was livid, believing he had been tricked into an unwilling exile by his increasingly nervous cousin. Months went by as Bokassa sought the support of friends in the French and Central African armed forces. As a result of his efforts and the personal intervention of then French President Jean Bédel, who referred to Bokassa as his companion in arms, pressure was brought to bear, and in October of 1965, David Dacko backed down and allowed Bokassa back to Bangui. After Bokassa's return from France, Dacko kept a beady eye on troop movements in the country. These two men would also have a stormy encounter in November 1965, during which the president threatened Bokassa with demotion. In mid-December, David Dacko approved a budget increase for his new special police unit while rejecting the budget that Bokassa had put forward for the army. After hearing this, Bokassa was enraged and made no attempt to conceal his feelings. By the end of December 1965, a tense atmosphere lingered over Bangui as rumors of coups and counter-coups were circulating ominously. It was on the fateful evening of 31 December 1965 that Bokassa set his coup plans in motion. In their attempt to capture power, Bokassa and his entourage were met with little resistance. Meanwhile, President Dacko, who had left the presidential palace, was oblivious of the events that were taking place in his country. It was only when merrymakers that were returning from the capital told him of the coup that was taking place that he decided to return to Bangui, where he hoped to lead a resistance with the help of loyal officers and the French. Unfortunately, as he got to the city's western edge, David Dacko encountered a patrol of soldiers who placed him under house arrest. From there, he was taken back to the palace, where the architects of his downfall eagerly awaited him. Jean Bédel Bokassa embraced the president, saying, and I quote, "I tried to warn you, but now it's too late." David Dacko was then led by his captors to Ngaraba prison in Bangui's east end. Shortly afterwards, Radio Bangui announced the fall of the government and the assumption of power by Jean Bédel Bokassa and the army. During the evening of 2 January 1966, President Bokassa formed a new government, which he called the Revolutionary Council. He then abolished the National Assembly, disparaging it as a lifeless organ no longer representing the people. He assured the country that there would be elections later and that a new assembly would be formed. Bokassa also threw out the constitution but promised that another would be drawn up and submitted to the people. Initially, Jean Bédel Bokassa's regime was not especially brutal. His early actions included steps to improve meat supplies in Bangui and the introduction of bus services. There were moves to advance the status of women. A decree abolishing polygamy, for instance, was loudly applauded by women in the country. Considering Bokassa's adventuresome relations with women, there was an undeniable irony in this particular law. Another decree provided punishment for parents who interfered with the educational opportunities of their daughters. Dowries were outlawed, and so was female circumcision. The president counted music among his many enthusiasms, and so he subsidized the establishment of 2 national orchestras. I'm sure by now you all have a suspicion of how this story is going to unfold from this point onwards. Jean Bédel Bokassa had at long last the one thing he had always wanted: power and the prestige and recognition that went with it. He enjoyed it immensely and believed it was the fulfillment of his destiny. Soon it became very apparent that he had little inclination either to lose it or to let it go. As early as October of 1966, Bokassa admitted his intention of remaining indefinitely as the nation's guide and made the following pronouncement: "I am everywhere and nowhere. I see nothing, yet I see all. I listen to nothing and hear everything." Such is the role of a head of state. Soon his image began to appear on office walls, billboards, t-shirts, and the covers of school exercise books. Public buildings and streets were renamed in his honor. In 1970, Bokassa built a university in Bangui, which was named after himself. Jean Bédel Bokassa liked to describe himself as an absolute monarch and forbade mention of the words democracy and elections. He promoted himself first to the rank of general and then to marshal for supreme services to the state. For public appearances, he insisted on wearing so many medals and awards that special uniforms had to be designed for him to accommodate them. As one story goes, when Jean Bédel Bokassa met Idi Amin Dada for the first time, he wore his decorations. The jacket of his field marshal's uniform, especially lengthened and strengthened for the purpose, glittered from neck to knee with every medal he had ever received and every order he had ever dreamt up to present to himself. It is said that Idi Amin was so furious to find himself so upstaged, and he immediately set his jewelers to work on a comparable display for himself. During his rule, Bokassa's every whim became government policy. At one point, he himself held 12 ministerial portfolios and interfered in all the others. He controlled all the decision-making, every promotion or demotion, every reward or punishment. Ministers were shuffled regularly, as often as 6 times a year, to ensure that they did not become a threat. Using government funds at will and fortunes he made from diamond and ivory deals, Bokassa acquired a whole string of valuable properties in Europe, including a 50-room mansion in Paris, houses in Nice and Toulouse, and a villa in Bern. It would be an understatement to say that Jean Bédel Bokassa had some wild antics. Incensed at the rising number of thieves in Bangui, in 1972, Bokassa joined his troops in the public beating of 45 thieves in the capital's central square. 3 of them died, and the brutally wounded survivors were put on display for 6 hours in the broiling sun. A year earlier, to celebrate Mother's Day, Bokassa ordered that all mothers in prison be released and that all those who had been accused of matricide be executed. 2 people were executed. Jean Bédel Bokassa loved women and made no secret of his successes with women. The women provided him with sensual pleasure, but they also served to enhance his image. In Saigon, as noted earlier, Bokassa married Nguyen Hu, and a daughter was born of the union. He left them when he sailed for Europe, but he would however spend considerable effort with the help of the French consul in South Vietnam to track down his daughter Martine. A girl claiming to be Martine had been found, but when she arrived in Bangui in the Central African Republic, she turned out to be an imposter. Nevertheless, to show his magnanimity, Bokassa adopted this fake Martine. The real Martine was eventually found working in a cement factory in Vietnam. About a while later, Bokassa offered both of them in marriage via a kind of public auction, with the eventual winners being a doctor and an army officer. Unfortunately, for the fake Martine, the marriage was to end in disaster. Fake Martine's husband was involved in an assassination attempt on Bokassa and was therefore executed. After this horrendous incident, the fake Martine also disappeared. She was likely strangled or shot before being secretly buried somewhere. Even as his behavior grew increasingly erratic, Jean Bédel Bokassa maintained warm relations with France, the former colonial master. The French, keen to ensure that the Central African Republic remained within the French orbit, continued to underwrite his regime with financial and military support. But as we have come to see, Bokassa always had wayward moods, and sometimes he would pick quarrels with them, occasionally threatened to leave the French fold. In 1969, he announced a move to the east and proclaimed scientific socialism as his government's goal. He did this expecting rewards to flow from the Soviet bloc, but when this failed to materialize, he reversed course. At one point, Bokassa abruptly converted to Islam, taking the name Salah ad-Din Ahmed Bokassa, hoping to secure funds from Arab countries. However, the results of this were disappointed, and he soon reverted to the Catholic Church. Despite these many quarrels, Bokassa's attachment to France remained profound. Bokassa also struck up a warm friendship with the President Valéry Giscard. Giscard's relationship with Bokassa had been unusually close, and Bokassa was adept, politically at least, at exploiting it. Giscard loved to hunt in Bokassa's private forests. Often accompanied by Bokassa, he would shoot elephants, giraffes, and the rare white rhino. Jean Bédel Bokassa estimated that Giscard personally killed some 50 elephants and countless other animals during the 1970s. Bokassa's strength in Giscard's eyes was that he was staunchly anti-communist. In the context of the politics of the time, this was an important consideration. Many African countries had turned towards Moscow. The Soviet Union had a large embassy in Bangui, and Bokassa enjoyed teasing France by doing deals with the Soviets. It was during Giscard's presidency that the French indulged Bokassa's greatest delusions of grandeur. In an attempt to emulate Napoleon, whom he described as his guide and inspiration, Bokassa declared the Central African Republic an empire and himself emperor of his 2 million people. He made elaborate arrangements for his own coronation, using as a model the ceremony in which Napoleon had crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804. The coronation took place on 4 December 1977 at the Palais des Sports Jean Bédel Bokassa on Bokassa Avenue next to the Jean Bédel Bokassa University. From France, he had ordered all the trappings of a monarchy: a crown of diamonds, the imperial throne shaped like a golden eagle, an antique coach, thoroughbred horses, coronation robes, brass helmets and breastplates for the imperial guards, tons of food, wine, fireworks and flowers for the festivities, and 60 Mercedes-Benz cars for the guests. Entering his coronation palace, Emperor Bokassa looked cool and calm. He wore a white robe set off with 2 striped sashes in the Central African Empire's national colors and a wreath of golden laurel on his balding head. The emperor ascended his throne, shaped in the form of a giant eagle with a 13.6 feet wingspan, 800 gilded feathers, and a seat carved out of the bird's belly. To the strains of Mozart and Beethoven, Bokassa, who was 56 years at the time, crowned himself and placed a smaller coronet on the head of his youngest wife, 28-year-old Empress Catherine. From this moment onwards, he would also be known as Bokassa I. The spectacle of Bokassa's lavish coronation, which cost about $22 million in a country with few government services, huge infant mortality, widespread illiteracy, and only 260 miles of paved roads, aroused universal criticism. But the French, who picked up most of the bill, dismissed all such criticism. The French Cooperation Minister, who represented President Giscard at the coronation, was even quoted saying, "I find it quite extraordinary to criticize what is to take place in Bangui while finding the Queen of England's Jubilee ceremony all right. It smacks of racism." Reminiscing in later years about the coronation, Bokassa said, and I quote, "It was the least the French could do to repay me for my services as a soldier fighting for their country and for all the personal favors their politicians received when I became president." Bokassa's erratic behavior and propensity for violence became increasingly evident during the 1970s. The list of Bokassa's victims at Ngaraba prison grew ever longer. The prison director subsequently testified, and I quote, "From 1976 to 1979, I executed dozens of officers, soldiers, thieves, students under instructions from Bokassa." Bokassa was also said to hold kangaroo courts at his villa, sentencing men to be killed by lions or crocodiles he allegedly kept there. The events that led to Bokassa's downfall started with student demonstrations in Bangui on 19 January 1979. This was in protest at an imperial edict that all pupils should buy and wear new school uniforms that were manufactured by a textile company owned by members of the Bokassa family and sold exclusively in their retail stores. These demonstrators were then joined by crowds of unemployed youths and quickly turned into riots. One of Bokassa's stores was ransacked during these riots. Bokassa's regime would brutally suppress these riots, but strikes by teachers, students and civil servants continued. In April of 1979, after further protests, scores of students were rounded up and taken to Ngaraba prison. One group of 30 students was stuffed into a small cell designed to hold only one person. Another group of 20 suffered the same fate. By the time the cell doors were opened the next morning, many were dead. Several witnesses claimed that Bokassa himself turned up at the prison and joined in beating and killing other students in detention. In France, the media dubbed Bokassa the Butcher of Bangui. No longer able to stand the embarrassment of propping up Bokassa's regime, the French decided to remove him. On 20 September, while Bokassa was on a visit to Libya, French troops stationed in Gabon and Chad flew into Bangui, took control and installed David Dacko as president. David Dacko had been released from prison in July of 1969, and by 1976 he was working as Bokassa's personal advisor. Meanwhile, after the coup, Bokassa sought asylum in France but was turned away. He found refuge instead in Côte d'Ivoire, and at a trial that took place in Bangui in his absence in 1980, he was accused of murder, embezzlement and cannibalism and was sentenced to death in absentia. While he was in Côte d'Ivoire, Bokassa began writing about his long and deep ties with the French. These autobiographical writings, which were published under the title My Truth, contain details of gifts of diamonds Bokassa is said to have frequently given to President Valéry Giscard. Although this book was banned in France, these disclosures are widely believed to have helped doom President Giscard's 1981 re-election bid against his socialist rival François Mitterrand. After spending 4 years in the Ivory Coast, Jean Bédel Bokassa was allowed to settle in his chateau in the west of Paris. But in 1986, feeling homesick, he decided to return to the Central African Republic, where he was put on trial, found guilty of murder, though not cannibalism, and sentenced to death. The sentence was subsequently commuted, first to life imprisonment, then to 20 years forced labor. After 7 years imprisonment, Jean Bédel Bokassa was released and spent his last years in Bangui, surviving on a French army pension. Jean Bédel Bokassa died in 1996 at the age of 75 and was buried in an unmarked grave in Berengo. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.
Oh yes, that was what happened in the Central Africa in the era of Imperial Bokassa. So he really ruled Central Africa in a way that nobody believed it, and nobody believed that it's going to happen that way. So I would like to hear your comments down below. Like, subscribe, and share the video to go around, and so that for next time, if there is any question you want us to answer, you can write it in the comment down below. And thank you for watching.